Hello everyone. This is week 2 in June, and I'm demonstrating the salting technique and painting flowers this week. I'll be painting in the background at the same time as painting the flowers. I've chosen to paint a foxglove because it's speckly and sort of lends itself, I think, quite well to this technique. But obviously you can choose any flower that you prefer. This is quite a complicated little one, really. But I'm actually going to try to make the flower become part of the background as well. Various ways of using this, and I would prefer you to choose your own painting style this month. But just follow the techniques that I show each time. So I'm going to leave a lot of choices to you this month. One tip I would give you though is to choose a background colour carefully, because this salting technique can look a little bit wintry, and so this is why I've gone for a sort of warmer, brighter colour rather than something like a grey or a pale blue, which is going to look very wintry and not quite right against this particular flower and the summer flowers that we'll be painting. Okay, so let's see how it goes. I won't know really until it's finished, and it is a bit of a challenge. These are the colours that I've decided to use for my foxglove, but if you don't have a foxglove, obviously you're going to choose your own subject. I have made a start and dried this off a little bit so that you can see the pretty patterns and shapes that the salt actually makes. So you can use either the large salt, which will make larger marks, but I'm actually just using the fine salt today, and I'm putting it on when the paint is quite wet so that I don't make it look too much like snow. I want to create patterns if I can, but it's very uncontrollable, so don't worry, whatever happens, happens. Now I want to try to become a little bit brighter as I go down the foxgloves now, so that they don't get completely lost. But as you can see, I've allowed some of these to become part of the background shapes, and so that's one way of doing it. It's a matter of painting quite loosely, but you can use whatever style. If you're a more detailed painter, then that's fine, you can use that technique. But I'm going to put the background in as I go along, and some of the salt will actually bleed into the flowers, which is what I want on this particular occasion. So I'm not being particularly detailed, I'm just indicating what this flower does, and hoping at the end it'll all dry up and work out. I can go back afterwards and just define a few shapes if I feel I've lost too much, but I'll just have to see how it goes. So there's a lot of freedom going on in this painting, and I'm putting a little bit of background in at a time as I go along, so there will be quite a patchy effect happening, and some of it will bleed into my flowers, but again, that's what I particularly want to happen. So wetting the area and dropping a bit more colour in if you feel you need to. I've done a very, very loose drawing, but I can't see it very well, so that's no bad thing. I'm kind of losing it a little bit, but again, that just creates freedom. So while it's still that wet, I'm actually going to sprinkle a little bit of salt on. Do it from a height, do it with dry fingers, and don't put too much on, because if it piles up it can't work. So what we've got to do is wait for that to dry completely before we brush it off. Right, there's one other flower popping out from behind this one. Lovely colours. I'm using quinacridone magenta and quinacridone violet, and a little bit of alizarin popped in to give some brightness where those little spotty areas sit in the inside of the petal. So if you put that in while, if you're painting a foxglove, if you were to put that in while the paint is still damp, then you're going to get the right sort of blended marks. I chose this colour because I thought the reds and greens look quite good together, and it's quite a challenge to choose the right background colour really, so that, as I said, it doesn't look too wintry. So I'm trying to make these look a little bit brighter while they're still damp, because I want this area to stand out a little bit more. But not being fussy about every bit of detail in these flowers, that's not what I want today. And using, as you see, lots of water. It is a good idea actually just to pop some water down first before putting your background colour down, because that helps you to keep control to an extent. Trick is not to be afraid of it and just let these lovely marks happen, and when it's dry you'll be surprised how nice it's going to look. Try not to cover up anything there that I particularly like the look of. That light's shining right in my eye. Right, there's another flower here. I'm using a size 8 series 402 brush. It's got quite a good point, but it holds a lot of water and paint. It's a sable blend, which is a little bit springier than the Kolinsky sable, but I don't know, it kind of works quite well for this. Not a brush I use very often, but I thought I'd give it a try. So just indicating what the shapes and what this flower does without getting too detailed. But as I said, when it's dry, would be a good opportunity to go back and define some shapes if necessary. They sit one on top of the other, so it's the sort of overall impression that you need to try and achieve. I'm also dropping in a little bit of permanent sap green here and there as well, just to indicate some leaf and just to break the monotony of the same colour in the background. I may have to stop and start depending on how quickly I work. You will be able to take your time actually, because with just painting a little bit at a time, you don't really have to be too speedy with it. As long as you make sure that you put the salt down before the paint is dry, that's the main thing. And when you take the salt off, everything lightens up in the background, so that your paint's going to dry up 3 times lighter than when you apply it, and when you take the salt off, it brings back more white paper, so bear that in mind. I think I'll get a bit lighter in this corner to take the eye away and out of the page, keeping the depth hopefully through the centre a little bit more. The salt will still work on a lighter colour, but it won't be quite so prominent. The patterning won't be quite so prominent as you see up there. Let's put this leaf in. It's all good fun. Lost quite a lot of that one. I don't know, I meant for that to happen particularly, but then that's what it's going to be like, so you can always wipe that away or use your little eradicator brush to make changes, to bring back any shapes that you feel you might have lost a bit too much. So if I allow that to dry a bit, I can go back in there. I think to paint foxgloves loosely it actually works quite well, because there are so many of them and they're quite tricky to paint to get all that detail in. I really do like the idea of painting them loosely, I think. So if you can paint light against dark, that's also going to be really helpful, and dark against light, remember that. It's always difficult if you're using the same tone in the tonal value in the background that you are using within the subject. You lose quite a lot of definition that way, but it's a big one here. Keep an eye all the time on your subject so that you can, pick out any little bits of variation that you can see to keep it interesting and avoid monotony. there is actually lots of leaf, so you know you can kind of go back afterwards and pop a bit more leaf going on, but being careful not to cover any of the nice salty marks that you've made that you really like. Bring that back a little bit. It's better. I quite like that one getting a little bit lost, so I think I'll not do too much to that. Lovely colours. I haven't got that many in the garden actually. They don't grow here quite so well as some other flowers. Make that one a little bit darker behind so that this one sits forward. That's a funny shape. That's kind of a little bit not quite formed. Right, I can bring that background right out now. Nice clean water. The point is useful insofar as it helps you to keep control and not touch anything that you don't want to blend away too much. But the lovely fat brush is great for holding quite a lot of water as well to keep you quite loose. You don't have to actually put the salt everywhere. If you wanted to leave particular areas without the salt, that's fine, and maybe put some of the sort of painting over a dry area like we did last week in places, then it doesn't get too monotonous. I'll show you one I did earlier afterwards, like that. Right, it's sort of coming together, I think. There's a leaf there. The big leaves seem to all be at the bottom and then lots of little ones up the stem. And these are nice where the flower has fallen off, but I don't think I'm going to have anywhere to do very much of that. But another day I could paint some of those in. lovely patterns. Right, put some leaves in. So choose, if you're putting a colour similar to this or a colour that has a little bit of green in it for your background, make sure you use a different green, maybe one with a lot of yellow in it or something for any leaf or foliage that you've got to paint. Then it won't fight too much with the foliage, and it will show up a little bit better. White flowers are very nice to paint with a lovely salty background, but I thought again it might start looking a little bit wintry, so I went for a colour. Right, fill this area in at the bottom here. I've tried to indicate the fact that there was another little plant at the side, just indicating it there. So you could add little bits of interest like that if you think about it. Now I've got 3, although it didn't really matter that I'd got the 2 because they're sort of overlapping and in a way just looking like one, so that rule can be forgotten in a situation like that. It's better to allow salty areas to dry naturally, so don't use the hairdryer unless you really have to. I think it's better to let it dry naturally, and you can actually blow it around if you do it too soon anyway, and then you've lost it. And don't attempt to brush it off until it's completely dry. It's a good idea to, even if you're using a block, to actually put the tape around, wrap it right round your pad so that you minimise the risk of cockling. I have got some cockling going on, but I know that when it's dry it's going to go flat because I've done that. Alright, lovely there. And don't worry if you paint over an already salted area, it's just going to push the salt in a different sort of position, but it will still make a pattern for you, a nice mark. Right, well, I seem to be more or less there, but what I need to do now is to allow it to dry and bring back any particular areas that I feel need some more work without hopefully overworking it. So I'm going to have to allow this to dry and come back to you in quite a long time. But while I'm waiting, so leave it flat somewhere. Let me just show you a bit more closely at this stage what it actually does look like. Oh, I'm not too displeased. Let me just show you this. That salting can be used with any colour. We used to think, when we first started using it many moons ago, that you could actually only really use it with Payne's Grey and Indigo to get a very good result. So this is why I made this chart, to show that actually you can use it with any colour. And experiment first, maybe, before you really get going, and try the different types of salts as well. This is wrapped, so it's probably shining, but this is using some salt, but some of the technique that we used last week as well, which meant that I allowed that to dry and then painted sort of twiggy, leafy marks over the top, and made it, you know, a lot more interesting and not quite so monotonous with the salt everywhere. This is a foxglove that I painted earlier as well, using a similar technique completely, and allowed the salt to bleed into the flowers as well, and used a lot of water. It was very wet, so that's a dried one. But what I'm going to do is allow this to dry, smarten it up a little bit, and then show you again. There we are. I haven't done an awful lot because I really didn't want to take away some of the lovely natural things that the paint, shapes that the painter's made, and the blending of the flower into the background. But I have just managed to bring a few up without them looking too overworked. I didn't touch the top because I wanted that to fade away and be more part of the background than this area. So that's it. Bit rushed, but I quite like it. In fact, I think I like it better than the other one that I showed you, because it's kind of lighter somehow and softer. It suits this particular foxglove anyway. So have a go this week. Don't necessarily try anything as complicated as this. Just one flower with a lovely salty background would look wonderful. So, just see what you've got and what you can find. Sometimes you might have to buy something if you haven't got things in the garden, but you'll always find something, I'm sure. And maybe also, as I said, try some of the technique that we use with the poppies as well, so that you haven't necessarily got the salt everywhere. Next week we're going to continue with using different techniques and maybe a little bit of mixed media, bringing the pen in or whatever. But I'm going to demonstrate the plastic film technique and try and find something that I feel is suitable for that technique. I'm not quite sure what that might be, but we'll see. So lots of freedom to choose your subject and to paint in whatever style suits you best. You don't have to put the background down as you go along, as I have, if you would prefer to just paint your subject and then put the background around afterwards. It is in many ways easier, depending on how loose you want your end result to be. But I do feel that confining it and taking some of that salty background area away has improved it, so that the subject is, showing up better. But I would like you to use the salt in one way or another, please. And I look forward to seeing what you do. And I'll be back again next week. Thank you. Take care. Bye-bye.